It's Bullseye. I'm Jesse Thorn. Next up, Cristela Alonzo. She's a veteran stand-up comic and actress. You might have seen her on her ABC sitcom, Cristela. She was the creator, the star, and she also wrote and produced it. Alonzo was actually the first Latina ever to do all those things on one TV show. She was born in a small town in South Texas. Her mom was an immigrant whose visa expired. Cristela remembers having to hide her from the cops, coming home every day wondering if her mom might have gotten picked up in the latest workplace raid. Cristela was also really, really poor growing up, and that's something she talks about a lot in her comedy. When we talked last year, it was just after she dropped her Netflix special, Lower Classy. It's a very funny ode to that time in her life. She talks about poverty, about immigration, depression, all with a warm smile and an infectious laugh. In fact, I don't think you could find a warmer or more infectious comedy performer than Cristela. In this clip from Lower Classy, she's talking about how she never really thought about poverty and stuff as a kid until it came to her favorite band, New Kids on the Block. Let's listen.
When I was in 4th grade, I realized I was poor because I was a really big fan of New Kids on the Block. Loved them, right? Now, I couldn't afford to see them in concert, right? So I had this fantasy when I was a kid, that I was gonna meet them and they were gonna fall in love with me, right? Like, no joke, you guys, this was the fantasy, 4th grade. I was gonna be the maid on their tour bus. And I was gonna clean things so good that they were gonna fall in love with me. Like, in my head, I thought they were gonna get on the tour bus and they were gonna be like, oh my God, who made that bed right there? You know what I mean? And then I would say, I made that bed. And they would be like, we love you now. And I'm like, ah! That was it. That was in 4th grade.
Cristela Alonzo, welcome to Bullseye. It's great to have you on the show.
It's good to be here. Thank you for having me.
That is maybe the single saddest stand-up comedy bit I've ever watched anyone perform in my entire life, and I've seen a lot of stand-up comedy.
Thank you.
I feel like I told my wife the setup for that bit last night, and she nearly started crying from having had it related to her.
Well, I know, but that's kind of like what makes stand-up cool is when you can actually make jokes about something that's sad, because everything can be funny if you have the right angle, perspective to it, But yeah, I totally get it.
Is this like something that you discovered along the way that you could actually just write jokes about the literal saddest parts of your entire life?
Yes, it was actually one of those things where my life overall has been pretty sad. So, knock, knock, who's there? Depression, It's like, for me, stand-up was about, it was autobiographical. I chose to be like that from the beginning because no one can take those jokes away from you. No one can ever steal those jokes away. They can't, a guy can't really do that and really own it. And for me, I think that I started doing stand-up after my mom passed away because I couldn't afford therapy. And I started stand-up really kind of talking about serious things from the get-go. So it kind of became my thing in a way because so many people started really connecting with what I was saying, and it kind of felt cathartic.
Have you had the opportunity to have therapy since?
I actually just started therapy again. This is how fun. Like, I started therapy, I went the first time in 2010, and I was really depressed. I didn't know what I was doing, and I just needed help. And my boyfriend at the time took me to therapy, and the last session that I could afford, the therapist told me, you're suffering from a severe depression. We're going to talk about that next week. And I was like, well, this is a to be continued episode. I'm like, no, we're not. And I stopped going because I couldn't afford it anymore. I had no insurance. I was really broke. And I was like, I'm not.
I'm just imagining, instead of those like chimes that you hear that signify the hour is over, you know, that kind of boom.
Yes.
Oh, I'm sorry, we're out of time. It was just bump, bump, bum.
Exactly. It's exactly what it was.
It seems like, and you know, I'm basing this on my experience with my own family members, that there is, I think, for some people, the feeling that like part of enduring the unendurable, that when we like go up against the hugest problems in our life, like real poverty, your mother was a single mother who was an immigrant, first generation immigrant, and so on and so forth, that like even acknowledging that they are problems or asking for help is just going to be the piece that falls out of the seawall, and the ocean's just going to subsume everything.
Well, you know, I also grew up in a neighborhood where, the kids would make fun of you if you tried to better yourself. You know, like, hey, what are you doing, reading? That's dumb. Like, why are you reading? You know, it's like that thing where you kind of, in my neighborhood, it was always we were very used to just suffering and accepting that that's life, suffering. So it wasn't till I moved out from that neighborhood that I realized life was different. Like, people had things I didn't know existed, you know? I didn't know air conditioning was available in houses till I was in high school. No, maybe junior high, but maybe high school. I had to go do a school project at a friend's house. And I walked in and I'm like, why is your house so cold? Because I loved cold. We didn't have air conditioning. She's like, oh, is it too cold? I'll lower the AC, which I had heard at school. And I thought only businesses had them. And then when I found that out, I'm like, oh my God. And I remember going home and telling my Mom, there's air conditioning for homes. And my mom's like, yeah, stupid, we can't afford it. Like, of course. And I'm like, why didn't no one tell me that? You know, it's that kind of stuff.
My wife and I have been together since high school, and like one of the first things I found out about her was that until high school, she believed, based on the cooking of her father, who was quite young when she was born, that a burrito was a tortilla with refried beans and slices of cucumber.
I've never heard of that before.
She just thought that was what a burrito was.
Oh my God.
Tell me about the town that you grew up in, because I have never been to South Texas, and I don't know what it's like.
I grew up in a little town called San Juan, Texas, which I always tell people that I grew up in McAllen because that's the big town. And even then, people are like, what? It's a border town. And growing up, we used to go to Mexico every Monday to visit my grandmother. And people don't understand, in the border town, this is what's interesting, is that culturally we talk about immigration and we talk about, like, you know, the people are coming here and taking away our jobs and everything. Actually, where I lived, we kind of coexist. You know, Mexicans come to the United States to buy our products because they always think that the Mexican products are substandard in quality. So they'll come to the departments, you know, to the stores, and they'll stock up on detergents and soaps and everything. And then at the end of the day, they go back to Mexico. You know, so my upbringing, my town was it was its own Mexican, its own Mexican style. Even when people say Tex-Mex, no, that it was completely different. It had its own thing, where going to Mexico was an everyday thing. There were so many kids that would go to Mexico. Teenagers would go to like Mexico and drink in Mexico and then come back, you know? And our whole community was predominantly Mexican. I was a theater nerd in high school, and I didn't know how different we were, because every play we did was a Mexican production of every play. So I always tell this story. Like, my freshman year, my school did The Diary of Anne Frank, and we're all Mexicans. So we're doing, so there's like all these Mexicans telling the story of the Holocaust. And we thought it was normal, and it wasn't until I left again that I'm like, oh, that's actually kind of unusual. What's weird is that I remember in high school with theater, because we were all Mexican, we were never told that we couldn't do anything. We were accepted. We were allowed to do like Into the Woods. We could do all of these musicals, all these shows. And I remember an acting teacher of mine said, as a Latina, you can only do West Side Story, chorus line. Rent was still on the edge of being kind of a hit. We weren't really sure. And that was devastating.
What do you feel like people assume about the world that you grew up in?
I think that people, it's the stereotype of, it's the assumption that...
I mean, like, I feel like probably you're a stand-up comic. You've probably had 15 years of people coming up to you after a show and telling you what assumptions they have,
all
like
the
directly.
Time. Well, especially before I had my TV show, I was really popular in the college circuit. And I was getting booked in Nebraska, Iowa, Wisconsin, Michigan. And I'll tell you this story. There was one show that I did where after the show, all these students lined up to ask me for my autograph. And I couldn't believe it. I'm like, oh my God. In my mind, I'm like, girl, you're killing it. Then I find out that a lot of these students have never met a Latino in their life. And that their Spanish teacher had sent them to my show and for extra credit. And they had to get an autograph from me to prove that they went to the show. So this autograph was basically saying, yep, I met a Latina. It was so mind-blowing because this wasn't in like 1894 or even 1953. I'm saying 2013.
Was your mother documented?
Yes, she was. She came on a visa. And this is actually why I like to talk about this. She came on a visa. I don't have any family pictures from my mom that aren't passport photos because she tried her entire life since she was living in Mexico to become a citizen here. And it's so hard. People don't understand. She wanted to become a resident alien. And in order to do that, you have to go back to Mexico and basically ask them for permission to become one. And she tried 3 times, and she got told no every time. And back then, every time was $5,000 to try, which in the 80s, a lot of money. My family, we were squatters in a diner, like the first 7 years of my life. My mom was trying to become a resident alien while we were squatting in this diner. So my mom, her visa expired, and she stayed in the United States trying to become a resident alien, trying to get that status. So while she was waiting for the process, she was undocumented.
Tell me a little bit about what it was like to live in a border town in a situation where you're a kid. You don't necessarily really understand exactly what the rules are about immigration and your mom and your family and I'm sure like your neighbors and friends. Mm-hmm. But you live in this physical space where the Border Patrol has a weird legal authority and a physical presence that, isn't felt anywhere else. I mean, there's roadblocks and things within 30, 40 miles of the border that don't exist anywhere else in the United States.
It's very good at instilling fear in people. And I think that's one of the biggest problems is that we don't get enough information, enough facts.
Did you feel scared?
I did. And see, that's what people don't understand is that I was born in Texas, but because my mom spent so much time being undocumented trying to become a legal resident, I become what my mom is. If she's gone, I'm done. And people don't understand that. It's not when people use the term anchor baby, whatever it is, it's like they make it seem like, oh, well, I'm like the golden child, oh, everybody, I'm just giving you freedom for everybody's free now. I'm here. No, actually, it's the opposite.
Let's hear some more comedy from Cristela Alonzo. Her new special is called Lower Classy. She talks about the election a lot, as you would expect. It was sort of what was going on. And in this clip, she's talking about what a lot of people are thinking about when they were talking in the election about bringing back the good old days.
You know what pissed me off when I started hearing people say, we need to go back to the good old days. We need to go back to the good old days. You ever notice it's only white people saying that? Brown people, when was our good old days, right? If it was really the good old days, why don't you ever see black people doing Civil War reenactments, right? You never see that? Never see that conversation. Hey, Lamar, what are you doing this weekend? I'm gonna go to my neighbor's house. I'm gonna cook and clean for free. You know, like the good old days.
I love that joke.
I have a good buddy who is a stand-up comic who is half Mexican and half Italian, and in his career, he is the characters that he plays tend to be Latino characters, and it's an important part of his life. But he doesn't speak Spanish. And when he would get booked on like a Latino theme show, which this is like a popular thing in stand-up comedy that always has a borderline offensive food name, like Spicy Chili Night or something like that.
Yes.
He would really struggle with that because it was not his world. And I know that earlier in your career, you toured on like Latin comedy shows where you have to there's an expectation there.
Absolutely.
That you are going to deliver the Latino.
I did not fit in at all. It was painful. When I moved to Los Angeles, I tried getting into the clubs, and there was one club in Los Angeles that sent me away and told me that I had to go do the Mexican restaurants and I had to go do the Mexican bar shows and everything because I was Latina and I couldn't get a spot at that club. And I did because I had to go up, and I was banished to this circuit where so many times I would just eat it. It was painful, but I needed gas money, or like they would pay me in like food. And for a while, I found myself slowly trying to placate to those audiences. And I hated myself. And one day I woke up and I realized I'm not being genuine to me, myself. I'm not being honest about what I want to talk about. And the moment I realized that I was doing that, I quit, which led me to being completely broke, which led to me not getting booked by anybody, which just led to me just completely devastated. I didn't go on the road for about 1.5 years, and I used that time to rebuild and really kind of say like, this is going to be my set, and if nobody likes it, then I can't do stand-up.
Was there a time when you considered falling into the cultural category of the white comedians that were around you, which is to say, like, leaving all of your specific cultural experiences out and just sticking with your feelings about Friends or Starbucks or other things that...
I have to be really honest. There was a part of me for a while that craved the ability to do that. I would watch specials and stuff, and I'm like, why can't I just write about coffee? Why can't I make coffee funny? But God, I really wanted to. And I tried sometimes. I would sit down in my notebook because I don't use my laptop. I write in a notebook, and I'm like, what's a general joke? Like, can I write a joke about pie? And then after that, I'm like, girl, you don't like pie. Why are you writing a joke about pie? You know what I mean? So I strayed away from it. But it's one of those things that I think, it's one of the pitfalls that I think a lot of us do, especially in stand-up, is that you see what's currently popular and you want to emulate it.
I feel like one of your signatures on stage is your smile and laugh.
I love that I smiled and laughed as you said smiled and laughed.
Well, I mean, it's something that you use when you are happy and making a joke. Mm-hmm. It's also something that you use when you are delivering a brutal truth
Yes.
in an effort not to lose the audience until you get to the punchline?
Well, actually, it comes from my mom. My mom grew up in a very abusive household, and she tried not to be that person, but she at sometimes could be pretty abusive. And as a kid, I always wanted to make her happy, and I wanted to make her laugh so that even because I saw the sadness in her face of living her life, that as a kid I wanted to make her laugh, and I wanted to entertain her to kind of take her away from her reality. So when I'm on stage, I'm unaware that I'm doing it because I've been doing it my entire life.
There was a picture that I saw of you as a kid.
Mm-hmm.
You're maybe 13 years old or something,
Mm-hmm.
and you're giving whoever is holding the camera just full future musical theater nerd, like full. You
Yeah.
are shining in this picture, right?
Yeah.
And your mother is standing next to
Yes.
you, as stone-faced as a human being, like the way that people
Yes.
look in photographs of farmers from 1890,
Uh-huh.
where they had to keep the same facial expression for 10 minutes
Yes.
so that it wouldn't blur. Like, just like
Yes.
she
Yes.
looks like she just found out that her parents died or something.
Yeah, my friends and my friends who have immigrant parents, we always joke about how like we try to take pictures of our parents, and when they're smiling, because they don't smile in pictures, that we try to sneak it in, but they're so good at telling when the camera was there that they would just stop smiling and go into like that stone cold like thing, like face, I know that picture that you're talking about. It's like I'm smiling and my mom's like, "Is this over? Can we move on with our lives?"
Yeah, or like, I have work to do.
Exactly. It's like, why are we taking a picture? This is depressing. Like, why are we remembering when we're so poor? Like, why are we doing this?
I felt like as I was watching your special, which you filmed, if I'm remembering correctly, in San Antonio,
Mm-hmm.
I heard laughter to your jokes of two kinds. One was the "that's a funny joke" laughter,
Mm-hmm.
your standard stand-up comedy
Yeah.
laughter. One was like almost a wail of self-recognition, like the
Yes.
feeling like, I never imagined
Mm-hmm.
someone would speak to my experience like this.
Mm-hmm. It's a different kind of laughter. And it happens in a lot of places that I go to. And that laughter is what motivates me to keep doing it because, again, I'm very hard on myself. And I'm very hard on myself. And when I hear that laughter, I feel like that's why I do it.
You said that you grew up for the first 8 years of your life squatting in a diner.
Mm-hmm.
What does that mean?
There was an abandoned diner in San Juan, Texas. My mom came from an abusive household, and then she married an abusive man, and she wanted to leave him. And she was pregnant with me. My dad wanted nothing to do with me, and she ended up leaving him. She's devout Catholic. I mean, she does not believe in divorce. She left him because she was scared for her life. Had nowhere to go, had a second-grade education, found this abandoned building, old abandoned diner, boarded up, off the main street in our little town. And we moved in there. And there was a house next to the diner, and she became friends with the neighbor. And the neighbor let her use an extension cord so that we could have electricity in the diner. I tell this story a lot about how my mom, she used to have a space heater, and this is back when they didn't have like safety features. So you could actually move the space heater face up, and she would cook on that space heater for us. I thought everybody lived like that.
When did you realize that that was different?
Till I moved to Los Angeles, actually, because I never spoke about it. Like, it was that thing, like, we never really talk about specific details about how we grew up. I was at a diner with some friends, and I started telling the story because the counter reminded me of the diner. And I started telling these stories about my childhood to these, I want to say 3 friends. And they kind of gave me this weird face, like, what are you talking about? And then I started describing it more because now they're like investigating, like, what the hell is this? It wasn't until like that night that they told me, like, Cristela, you lived in a diner. I didn't even think about it. And I remember like they laughed at me because they thought I was lying, like joking. And I called my family and I'm like, do we live in a diner? And everybody started, like, my brothers and my sister were like, yeah, stupid. Like, you didn't. I'm like, I didn't know. I was a kid, you know, I had no idea. And that's when I started realizing, like, I looked back at like a handful of pictures that we had and I started remembering stories. It's that like moment at the end of Fight Club when you flash back and he realizes he's Tyler. Like, you know, like, it's that thing. I started flashbacking and I'm like, not everybody grew up that way. I was like, not everybody grew up that way? Like, no. Like, my family had to tell me, Cristela, we're really poor. I didn't realize it till that moment because my mom did such a good job of making me feel happy.
Was there a point when you realized that that experience was also a kind of superpower? That it was
Absolutely. You know, I didn't realize. It wasn't until when I started getting auditions to like all the auditions I would get when I first started auditioning were maids with thick accents, like thick accents that I've never heard anybody use ever in their life. And I'm from a border town, right? And I finally turned them all down. And that's when I realized that my upbringing, like the hardship and everything, made me fearless. I'm very picky. I say no all the time to things because I grew up poor. Being poor made me fearless because what's the worst that can happen? I go back to being poor, lived it, had a great time with it. You know what I mean? I go back to being poor. That's what poverty made me realize, that nothing is worth it. If it doesn't feel right to you, it's not worth it. And again, it's like, I know, even if I became poor, again, I would never be that poor because I'm a capable adult that at the end of the day, I can go stock shelves of Big Lots if I have to. Like, I was a kid. I was actually living as a result of what my mom was capable of doing. And I know that because of her journey, I'm capable of a lot more.
Cristela Alonzo from last year. Her stand-up special, Lower Classy, is available right now on Netflix. It's hilarious. She is a brilliant comic. You can also hear her on a show that I produced, our new scripted podcast, Bubble. One thing that I knew about Cristela was that she is a huge sci-fi fan. She is so serious about Star Trek: The Next Generation and Doctor Who in particular. And so we invited her to play an evil corporate executive in an alternate universe Bubble City in our show Bubble. And she is so great in it. She's so funny. Cristela's great.